Webinar, Data-Driven Government and the Four Pillars of Value. Before we begin, I would like to thank our partners, the Florida League of Cities, for giving us the opportunity to present today. This event is being recorded, and you'll receive access to the recording as well as the slides via email within 24 hours. They will also be posted on the Florida League of Cities website. With us today are Socrata's Senior Product Manager, Tom Robbins, who will be covering the transformative ways data is shaping our world. We encourage you to ask questions using the GoToWebinar Q&A feature on the right side of your screen, and we will address questions near the end of the presentation. Tom, I'll hand the presentation over to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. We're going to talk about, I think, something that's incredibly important as you think about the idea of building out data-driven government. And this is an important topic, especially for Socrata, since we've focused exclusively on this for about the last 7 years. And we're first going to start with this idea of kind of what open data is, to give everyone a quick fundamental breakdown of what it looks like. Then we're going to talk about our value framework, which is really this idea of being able to quantify the value that you get in rolling out your open data. And then we're going to look at some customer stories as well as where our customers are seeing this. And the open or our value framework is an incredibly important part of that. So let's first take a step back. And as Brian had said, please feel free to continue to send in questions. And as we go along, we'll certainly look at what we can answer, but we'll do our best towards the end to make sure that we've answered everything. So first of all, if you're not familiar with the idea of open data, let's spend just a second talking about that. Open data is really the idea of taking the set of value that any government has stored in their data and then using that to fuel innovation. So what we tend to see, and it shouldn't be a surprise, is that governments have a tremendous amount of stored data. So everything from, crime statistics to maps to police data, kind of the list goes on, and then making that available to the public, to citizens, to businesses, and allowing them to consume it, to engage with it. Part of what we focused on around this idea of open data is being able to provide the opportunity for citizens and businesses to leverage how they're using it and then being able to take advantage of it. As you can see, I think depending on which analyst organization you talk to, there's a tremendous amount of value. The McKinsey study is probably the most well-known when it talks about a $3 trillion a year in value can be unlocked through the use of open data. So when we talk about this idea, one of the things that we at Socrata saw was this idea of, well, how do you quantify that value? I mean, at the end of the day, being transparent and making data available is incredibly important. But like any investment, whether it's an IT project or a business adventure, you really need to quantify the value or these sets of outcomes that you're going to see. So with over 200 and some odd customers, we spent a lot of time in the last year or two working with them to understand kind of where they're seeing the value, where success is coming, how you build out that criteria. And that's what you're seeing here is our data-driven government framework. Within that framework, we have kind of 4 key pillars that we're going to cover today. First is citizen experience. Second is making better decisions with data. Third is operational efficiency. And then fourth is the economic impact. So let's actually kind of get into how we think about each of these pillars. So first of all, the idea of citizen experience is really the idea that we want to access government data and services kind of as easily as we communicate with Facebook. Being able to really unlock the value as a citizen and kind of breaking down the barriers to get at services or things that I need in order to understand them. And citizen experience is an incredibly important part. And when you think about that, there's a couple of ways to think about it. And what I want to do is give you a couple of examples and kind of real live examples that you can see as well. So for those of you that are listening, you may have a 311 system. So this is non-emergency services. And what happens when you think about citizens engaging, they're very interested in everything from, fixing potholes to, to street lights that are out. And the problem that we often hear, and as we talk to our cities, is this problem of being able to understand kind of who's doing what and how that's working out. So here's an example, and I know that it's a larger city, is the idea of San Francisco, and they have their 311 Explorer. And what this Explorer does is it allows them to take the 311 data, so the data that citizens are calling in, and being able to show that back to citizens. So I can see a couple of things. One is I can see that my government's doing what I asked them to do. Also, it allows me to look at and maybe compare what's going on in my neighborhood or my area. So I look at this particular area, you'll see that there was a set of tickets that were closed. You can see that the majority of things people are interested in my particular area, is abandoned vehicles, and they represent a huge amount of the tickets that are actually coming in. And then I can do things like drill in. So what this allows is citizens to engage and to understand what the government's doing, and we often see, I think everyone listening probably has a public works department, and this kind of solution has a tremendous value. From the citizen's perspective, they can see and they can communicate with the data that's there, and then being able to track, hey, I submitted this, did somebody do about, did someone do something about it, or is it just, sitting out there and I'm never going to get a response? So this is a great example of kind of one of the possibilities that's there. The other side of that, and I know we're going to talk about this in a later section, is this idea of operational efficiency. And I always kind of, the two always seem to come together for me, because if you think about citizen experience, we want, as government employees, to provide that, but we also need to think about how is this going to make my efficiency better. One of the things that this particular application does that I did want to call out, and unfortunately I'm in a demo environment here, so not in the San Francisco, is this idea that it allows me to see what categories people are visiting, and also allows me to look at the various neighborhoods that are there. So I can make some decisions about who's engaging using this tool, and is this a good engagement mechanism, meaning I can create better operational efficiency around that, or do I need to go out to other areas and kind of think about other means of engagement, whether it's Twitter or some other kind of community engagement. What is the other thing to think about, and is something that we do see when you think about citizen experience, is engaging citizens a little bit better. We work with a lot of customers, and I was actually talking to a mid-sized customer who was saying that they recently looked at who was attending their board meetings, and they realized that the population was getting older, and that they really wanted to engage the younger population. And part of that was providing the digital services that's needed. And we tend to think of citizen experiences today as digital by default, or being mobile enabled, so that I can access it kind of anywhere and anytime that I want. So that's kind of one area of citizen experience. The other that I often think about, and here's some examples of state of Connecticut, is your budget and expenses. And a lot of times what happens is budget is an incredibly complex process that happens, right? So we think about this idea of being able to access budget information, and often on the government side it's incredibly complex. So we spend a lot of time building out these huge CAFRs, these incredible 500-page documents, and I've worked with customers where I see these incredible PDFs that just quite honestly aren't consumable. So when we think about this idea of open data, you'll see us talk about or really think about laying out this core platform which allows you to share data, and then creating value adds on top of that, which allows you to really kind of talk about and visualize and simplify things like your budget. So here's an example of the state of Connecticut budget. You'll notice that you have operating revenue and operating expenses, and I have the ability to drill in, and you'll see that I can see, kind of, well, I'm getting this much from personal revenue, and then you can see I can kind of click into things a little bit further and kind of start to understand what's there. The other, and we'll kind of hop over to another example. Here's Cambridge, and Cambridge makes this available. And one of the things that we are starting to see as you think about kind of citizen experience is the idea that this is reducing FOIA requests. And we've got some great examples of people reducing FOIA requests as much as 40 to 60%. But this idea of citizen experience allows me to come to, if I'm a Cambridge, Mass citizen, look at the budget, understand it, be able to track the flow of money. So I'm interested in operating expenses. I could see education, and you'll notice that I can hold my mouse over and I can see kind of how much has been submitted, how much is approved, and then as you saw earlier, I can look at how much is spent. So it allows me to see kind of the full circle of value. And the other part is that we've simplified the governmental accounting, because often what we find, if you've looked through any of the CAFRs, is it becomes very hard. The other side of this, as I said earlier, when we think about the idea of operational efficiency, is that you can not only kind of use this externally, but we are seeing a lot of folks take advantage of this as an internal opportunity, and being able to share your budget as it goes through the cycle kind of internally behind the firewall. So we go ahead and close that down. Last is what we call open payroll, and one of the things that I often ask as I talk to a variety of cities, states, is how many people get FOIA requests around payroll, and everyone of course shakes their head. We have a lot of customers, in cities that we work with who legally have to put it out every year. And then the operational efficiency side, they go get a newspaper article, or get a section in the newspaper, or they wait for someone to send in the FOIA request. Well, Los Angeles, who's just kind of leading some of this, really decided to take advantage of that, and they started making this data available. And you have the option, obviously, to either put names behind it or not, and they decided not to, but you'll see it kind of gives you the payroll summary. The other is it gives you the highest payroll and then top departments, which I think is super important around this to understand is, as in any citizen experience engagement, you are given the opportunity to tell your story, right? Because the reality is you're the one who can create narratives around it and kind of explain it. So as you can see here, we get our highest paid employee turns out that it's a chief port pilot. And if I click into it, it'll explain to me kind of what a port pilot is. And to be honest with you, I didn't know what it was until I looked at it. And then you can see kind of the base pay, the overtime pay, and then the other pay, and kind of how that breaks out. So I can kind of understand what value that's there. Once again, I can click into the charts, and not surprising, police obviously has the largest amount. And then we can kind of click in and we can look at things like the fire department and see kind of how that piece is actually playing out. One of the things that I always like to point out is, especially here in LA, one of the things that we saw was they had tremendous amounts of forest fires, and when they made their payroll data available, what they had discovered was that it looked a little bit skewed on the fire side, and then they were able to use this kind of citizen experience and the citizen engagement to tell that story, that hey, we saw a tremendous amount of forest fires this year. which is why there was a lot of overtime paid to firefighters. So I think that that's kind of a huge piece, understanding on the citizen engagement side. So let's hop back into our presentation. And so when we talk about citizen experience, and this is kind of one of the, I think, canonical examples that I always like to do, is the idea of Yelp and food inspection. So as you can see, part of what we believe in being able to create value around your data is this idea of getting it out into what we call the network. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but the network includes being able to access it from consumer applications. And a great example here is when you think about San Francisco, the idea of not only can you get restaurants and be able to understand, kind of 4 stars or 3 stars, but you can start to compare that health score. And there's been some great studies done which really talks about this idea of the more available the health score is, the more likely that you're going to see foodborne illness decrease. Because if you look at this, and kind of, I'll give you a great example, is my wife and I were actually down in San Francisco, and we said, hey, let's go out to dinner, and we actually had up the Yelp app about a year ago. We had up the Yelp app, and we were looking at kind of different restaurants around, and we found one, and I think it was like a 4-star, and then we realized that it had like a health score of 30 out of 100. So what that did is we, of course, went to another restaurant because it hadn't passed the health score. So this really allowed us as citizens or tourists to make the decision and kind of vote with our dollars. But it also provided a tremendous opportunity for those folks that had great health scores, because it allowed us to see kind of how this is working out. Yelp is kind of a great example, and what Yelp did is they worked with us as well as others to develop a standard. So when you publish your data, for example, to Socrata, we can automatically make it available and it can be pulled in. So this is kind of one of the huge powers of what we call the network, and being able to drive that benefit. But for citizens, it gives them access to different areas and different things they can do. So let's talk a little bit around the idea of the second pillar of value. And this is simply called data-driven decision making, as we said before. And it's kind of interesting because as governments, we have a finite set of resources. We have a finite set of people that we can work with. And really what we're looking at doing is making better decisions. Do we want to go ahead and take care of something or something else? So you're always constantly weighing what people are trying to do and what your citizens are asking for. So a lot of benefit in how you unlock open data really comes in with this idea of making better decisions and creating a data-driven decision. Great example here that we saw is something called the Mayor's Geek Squad in New York City. What had been happening in New York City is they had been having a huge problem with drains that were clogged. There was grease in them, and obviously they had to go out and fix them. So I think it was like half of the cost of what they were seeing in drains was really coming from this clogged problem. And the reality is, what was happening is restaurants were taking their grease and then pouring it down the sewer, which clearly isn't the thing you want it to do. And the city had done the right things by going out and kind of handing the restaurants literature, making sure they were aware. And then kind of the next step of this was the city said, well, I guess we've got to put officers or people out there at night to try to catch who's ever doing it. And really what happened was the Mayor's Geek Squad stepped up and they said, you know what, let's take a look at the data. And they were able to triangulate using not only open data, so the idea of where restaurants were in relation to where the sewers were, but also what they called haulers, so people who were coming and picking up the grease, and then be able to triangulate down to geoposition which restaurants in the different areas were more likely to be causing it, and it was something like 90 or 95% accuracy. So, it's a fantastic example of being able to kind of tie all of this data together to be able to solve a real problem. And instead of having, officers out keeping an eye on who was pouring grease down the drain, they were actually able to engage them in what definitely would be much more important pursuits and kind of more focused on what the citizens would do. Another example here that we talk about is this idea of dashboarding, and typically what we find is people who are political, they come into office, they want to create a set of dashboards to track. We also find that cities are using it as a way of being able to really show what's going on. Here's an example of Edmonton in Canada, who provides this 360-degree citizen service view, and you can see that they're focused on some very specific areas that they were seeing. So, for example, traffic injury rate, being able to show injuries per thousand of population. Their goal was to decrease this. So it becomes a very transparent way, and any citizen can go look at it, kind of see where they track at the time, as well as knowing kind of what problem they're trying to solve. So it's kind of an important thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at another site of our customers here. Let me pull up there we go. So here's Danville. Danville did a couple of things. First, they started with their budget, as you can see here. So, just like I showed you before, they were able to make their budget available. We could kind of explore it. Then they realized that they were missing the other side. So when we talk about kind of citizen experience or data-driven decision making, they made their checkbook available. And then within their checkbook, you'll notice that there's a couple of things, right? One is I have the ability to look by spending type. So from a pure citizen perspective, I can look at everything from the biggest spenders to the most expensive items, and I can kind of look across the entire check register to kind of understand what's going on. And you'll notice up across the top that we've got what we call a sentence-like structure, so you're building it and hopefully it makes it kind of a lot easier. The other is that I can go ahead and kind of drill in. So really what they were doing is they were starting to kind of connect not only their budget but their expenses and kind of bring it around. And then what they realized was that the next step of this was really to start dashboarding or being able to really provide this. So this is actually the City of Danville's dashboard and what they use to make data-driven decisions. As you can see, a big thing to them is to maintain the low violent crime rate, right? So they're looking, they can create exactly what's on track. They're looking at reducing property crime, and they're being kind of honest in here as far as what they're looking at doing. And if we just click into kind of one of these areas, we can see, hopefully, as long as my internet connection is still holding up, we can kind of see more detail. But the idea here is what we're trying to show, or the city is trying to show, is really a great way to engage with citizens and be very transparent in the decisions that they're making as a way of kind of driving that behavior. The other one I'd like to point out is Kansas City. Kansas City has a tremendous history around being transparent. You can see they've got their 5-year citywide business plan that's published, and then they're tracking against that. For Kansas City, they're very focused on things like customer service, right? So they really, they want to be transparent in that they're trying to increase the communication and make it available, as well as financing governments, infrastructure, neighborhoods and healthy community, and public safety. So they're being transparent, and it allows them to kind of show where they're going, kind of what pieces that they're looking at getting into, and then being able to kind of drill into that. So what you can see if we kind of drill into this, you can see why it's a priority, how we can measure it. There you go. And then kind of the data that goes underneath it. So this allows the city to make data-driven decisions, use the data, engage the citizens to be able to kind of solve the problem that they're looking at. They're being very transparent in what they're focusing on. So as you can see, it's kind of a great example. So let's go ahead and hop back into our slides here. And there we go. All right. So the third is economic impact. And this one, I think, is just as important. It's unfortunately, I think, a little bit what I would call squishy, in the sense that when you think about open data, that it really is making a measurable difference in your community. And this includes things like contributing jobs, consumer spending, and tax revenues. The reality is we see a tremendous amount of this. I think the greatest example of the idea of open data creating economic impact is if you look at the GPS industry as kind of one example. However, there are a ton of examples on how this is actually built out. So, for example, when we go to Porch.com, so if you're not familiar with Porch.com, they are a home renovation, and Porch.com basically is using open data to provide a bunch of things. One is they'll look at permit data, they'll look at how that data is being used, provide a home report. Before we look at that, I want you to understand a couple of things. One is I live in Seattle, and within Seattle, we publish that data and make that data available. So what I want to show you first is this idea of the building permits that are out there. And this is what we call our data lens technology. And really what this has done is we publish the data, we have a way to ask a set of questions and get a set of answers, and then kind of drill into it. So it's an incredible interface for being able to understand things like, what the locations of the current permits are, how many permits there are, being able to, as I kind of look, well, I only want to see permits in this specific area, in this specific region. The reality is this provides a ton of information, and folks like Porch actually took that on and provided value-added services. So what I wanted to show you is I went into Porch, I pulled up my house, or my townhouse, and what you can see is that there were 12 total projects that occurred in there. So because it's connected through Porch, they're able to show kind of, who's done floor polishing. What's interesting is they're tracking the actual permits that occurred in my house. So it allowed me to see, I bought it, I think it was back in, I don't know, 2010, 2011. So, you can see kind of where the house was built, the permits that were built. I can track kind of the life of my house and what happened within my house, so I can actually see, for example, did they get the permit to build the deck? Did they get the right permit? Be able to kind of track that back. And this is all open data, so they were pulling from kind of the building permits piece that I was showing here, and then being able to show it specifically for my house, and then in the area that I live in. So it's a great example of being able to leverage open data as a way of driving value. Site Complete is another one. They also take permits. So permits, as you can imagine, are such a high value data set, right? Because it allows us to see what's being built, how is it being built. Site Complete is a great example because they keep an eye on it. There's another example of a company called Building Eye that allows you to pay a subscription fee, and any permits that are approved or entered in your specific area, it will show you. And they've got a huge foothold in things like contractors. And if you kind of think about it, you get to think through the idea, well, you can't put drywall up until the electricity is done. So there's kind of a set of permits that go there, and you can kind of track that. And I know in Seattle, the goal here is really to create better operational efficiency, right? If people can submit things online, they're not constantly calling in. You know, there's a lot of power in providing that self-service model. And then last, and we've covered, I think, this quite a bit, is the idea of operational efficiency. Operational efficiency is its core, and I think we've covered it quite a bit as we've gone through this, is really about doing things like increasing self-service, reducing system maintenance, and then really looking at kind of how you can redeploy that set of values. And the reality is that there's lots of examples of these, and kind of a simple study I always recommend people is something called PERG. PERG is put on by a third party, and it looks at kind of financial transparency websites, and then it tries to track a lot of those ROI stories. So it says, well, you know, it's important that you put your budget and your expenses and everything else online, but the reality is kind of what value does that drive, and it tracks the stories that's there. So it's a third party. I definitely will make these slides available, but here's, you know, just a few of the example that people were able to pull out of that. I mean, some of the ones that I'm always amazed at is Texas renegotiating its copier machine lease to save $33 million over 3 years. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. Being able to really tie a lot of that into negotiating contracts, being able to eliminate inefficient spending, reducing costly information requests, and that's something that we often hear a lot. I think Mississippi estimates it's about $750 to $1,000 in staff time, when, you know, typically, and I know everybody listening will probably say it's a little bit of a different thing, but if you can reduce those FOIA requests and provide self-service, you can actually save a ton of money. I know Chicago, you know, says that they, by publishing their data online, they saved, I think it's like 30 or excuse me, they've reduced their calls, you know, and their FOIA requests by about 30 to 40%, which is kind of a huge piece of this. And you look at things like transparency websites and how they're useful, and you can see, so a lot of these are, you know, 2 million visits. And what's interesting is you think about the visits and you think about kind of what I talked about, the 311 data, being able to categorize those visits and then saying, well, people are getting self-service, so we're probably engaging more. Even if you take a very small number and you compare that to the amount of calls that you're getting, you should be able to see a reduction and be able to claim that, I think, as a cost savings. And there's a huge amount of value. I mean, the PERG study is available. You can download it. It's free. It's online. You know, here's another example of the Oregon Secretary of State, and how they were able to use a searchable interactive database of trademark. They were able to save about $500,000. They increased their reach by 7-fold. You know, and they were able to reduce staff time by a quarter, and that's pretty substantial in cost savings and being able to get that up. And that was something that, you know, I always like to tell people there's a tremendous amount of value that you can see out of this, and operational efficiency. You know, another example is San Francisco was able to reduce their 311 calls, right? So into a savings of $1 million a year. We also have examples of cities, you know, who've made things like bus schedules available, and they've been able to reduce the calls that they're getting. Obviously, also improve the quality of life for citizens, and being able to kind of tie all that together. So these 4 pillars of value are an incredibly important thing as you think about kind of opening your data and making sure that you're using it and getting value out of it. And I often think of these as kind of the value pillars, as a way of kind of driving the value and being able to say, well, we're going to do open data, but we want to focus. And what's interesting is you don't have to focus, obviously, on all 4. But you should be able to see value across, one of these or two of these or three of these in kind of whatever you're trying to do. So let me go ahead and pull this down. There we go. We'll go ahead and go back in. All right. So making it actionable, and one of the things we've done based on our research is really start to think through um, how you can actualize these benefits, and part of what you're seeing here is the idea of things that you can do. Um, is something I just want to spend a few minutes on. And these are kind of defining activities within each of these different areas. Citizen experience, getting them to participate more, data-driven systematic approach to tracking, and these are ways that you can you can kind of show value back to your citizens and be able to kind of define and control kind of how you're driving through on a lot of this. And certainly for everyone it might be a little bit different. This is based on our research, and this is based on the 200 or so customers that we have as an example. So what I'd like to do is take any questions that people may have. Feel free to go ahead and send those in, and we'll hold on a second. Bryant, do you have any questions? I see that I've got one or two that I can answer. Do you have any additional?
No, but I'll just make a quick comment there that we do have a poll up for the those that are attending to answer if they would like while we wait for those questions. So if you have some questions, go ahead for it.
Perfect. I have one question that came in, which was asking kind of where to start. And I think that's a great question. So you start where it makes sense. What we've tended to find is as you think about making data available, the easiest place to start is where you might get the highest value. And based on our experience, it typically is around things like financial, your expenses, or kind of the easy places to get started. You've already got an infrastructure in place, meaning you're producing CAFRs, you're producing other reports, you're answering FOIA requests, so it gives you the opportunity to start there and then kind of build on. So there's a lot of room and places for people to start. Let's see, another question that came in, can you give some examples of, you talked about high value data sets, what would those be? Okay, so that's a great question. When we think about this idea of high-value data sets, these are easily, when you talk to anyone in your organization, these are the ones that you get the most requests on. Based on the data that we've seen, these tend to be, as I said, financial data. They also tend to be 911. They tend to be 311. They tend to be crime statistics. We hear a lot of police departments get calls every morning, what's going on in my neighborhood. Once a month they're asked to prepare requests for HOA associations, right, as they try to show, is their neighborhood safe, is the homeowner area, good to live in. One of the interesting stories as you think about kind of the 911 is in Seattle. Seattle actually publishes their 911 data, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but one of the reasons for it was every day they would get calls from insurance companies wanting to know, incident reports and accidents and things that happen, and then by making that data available, they were able to reduce that, and I forget the exact number, but it was a very substantial amount of money they were able to save, in order to, that they're able to save by providing it that way. With that, I don't see any additional questions coming in. I did want to encourage people to, if you go to Socrata.com, you can find the data-driven government framework. We've got a series of 5 white papers, which provides a ton of information across the 4 pillars that we talked about in a way to kind of drive and get more information from it. As always, we appreciate any feedback. We also, if you want more information, definitely keep an eye on us on Twitter or social media. And with that, we hope that you will join us for another webinar. And as always, if you have any question, feel free to contact us at socrata.com. And with that, I will go ahead and end the webinar.